Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of the Rotoworld Football Podcast. My name is Josh Norris, joined here on this Week 2 preview show by John Daigle, Hayden Winks, and Patrick Doherty. Gentlemen, how are we? Hayden, is it still sunny and beautiful outside in California? Saw when you stood up that you're wearing sweatpants, so you must be in a wonderful mood.
I am, except the fire, so it hasn't been too sunny. But aside from that, yeah, typically pretty sunny out.
Very tone-deaf comment from Josh.
I cannot believe I forgot about that. I'm living in my own world over here. Daigle, what's life like in Evan Silva Manor over there?
We have moved on from just cooking breakfast for us to actually separating our clothes at this point in life as well.
So who does the laundry? I'm guessing you do. Not Evan does not do the laundry.
It's a little bit of a tag team. Give the big man some credit. We're all just trying to get by. We're all just trying to make it.
All right. Well, we aren't going to waste much time today because today, like I said, we're going to go game by game with the 15 remaining contests in Week 15. We'll start off with the 1 o'clock slate on Sunday and start off here with the New York Giants going on the road, 5.5-point road dogs against Chicago Bears. 42 total in this one. Hayden Winks, we saw some explosion last week from Daniel Jones to Darius Slayton. And we also might have seen Mitchell Trubisky, one of his best performances as an NFL quarterback.
Yeah, both of those things were true. The total still here is really low. The Giants are projected for 18 points, the Bears at 24 points. So it's still going to be a low-scoring game. I thought the story of the Giants game was definitely Darius Slayton. He had wide receiver 5 fantasy usage, which is just basically my expected points model. So that's really encouraging for Darius Slayton owners. I feel like he's going to be the guy that keeps scoring touchdowns when my models keep telling me that's unsustainable. So I'm ready to take my L on Darius Slayton this year.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Darius Slayton was a special player. I was not expecting 2 touchdowns in Week 1, but he's someone I understand the divide on. I know that he's kind of a model Fryer, and I also know that more often than not, the models are right. That was just more pure, instinctual, loving to watch him play, being kind of high on Darius Slayton this summer. But, I mean, Hayden and I have already talked about it. I mean, the concern will be just hopefully now he doesn't go 5 weeks with 0 touchdowns and, then has another 2 touchdown, outburst either against a bad defense or a game where Golden Tate's missing again or something. So the key for him will be the greater consistency this year.
And Golden Tate looks to be limited in practice again, so we could have another good game script for an opportunity for Darius Slayton. I would stress to not worry about Saquon Barkley either, because I have received a number of mentions asking about him. And yes, Jason Garrett, go figure, still lacks aggressiveness and is arguably the league's worst play caller inside the 10. But the Giants used no huddle at the league's highest rate, and Barkley actually played in the slot at the second highest number of snaps among all running backs. So this week he gets a defense, unlike the Steelers' defense, which stuffed them behind the line of scrimmage. The Bears allowed Steelers running back. No, wait, who'd the Bears play?
The Detroit
Lions.
Football Lions.
The Bears allowed the Lions 4.7 yards per carry last week to their running backs. Thank you. I will sign myself out.
I kind of think, and I opened this conversation by talking about Mitch Trubisky, I don't want to be as harsh to say that we're grading Mitch on a curve here, but I kind of honestly think we are because, he has some incredible throws. And those don't happen in every game, but they certainly happened in Week 1. That one to Anthony Miller, basically to win the game, was fantastic. But then he also has, 3 or 4, even 5, mind-melting throws or decisions or inaccuracies per contest. And, if those are just incompletions, then that doesn't impact the win-loss column, right? But if 2 or 3 of those are turnovers or a missed third down, and so they have to punt the ball away, those absolutely impact the outcome of a contest. So it really is kind of a coin toss of just, if those singular plays go on to help them or prevent them from winning a football game. And when those do happen, I think we are allowed to be harsher on Mitch. And I think overall, as a process standpoint, we can still be harsh on Mitch.
Having said that, he was 8 of 10 in the fourth quarter for 3 touchdowns when the Lions lost all 3 of their starting cornerbacks. So that also explains why he suddenly turned on the switch.
I'll also go gladly negative on Mitch where, if you get drafted in the NFL, I mean, pretty much by definition, you should be able to occasionally make a really good throw. The problem is all the bad ones. I mean, anyone, even on an NFL practice squad, could make 2 or 3 wow throws a game probably. The problem is all the mistakes, which you said.
Hayden, what's the confidence level in Allen Robinson? We saw some odd off-field activity from him in terms of, true boomer lifestyle of deleting all mentions of the Bears off social media. There's some talk that he is disgruntled of a contract. His teammates are kind of standing by him in that request. We saw him play well, and we saw Anthony Miller play well. And outside of that on the Bears, I wasn't too keen on anyone else.
Yeah, Allen Robinson's somebody that is a rebound candidate in my fantasy usage model. He had 10 targets, 148 air yards. And the last time he played against the Giants, he scored 25 PPR points. So I have zero concerns for Allen Robinson. He's going to be inside my top 12 receivers again this week. The player that I was kind of watching was Anthony Miller, who only ran a route on 55% of the Bears dropbacks last week. I thought he was going to be a locked-in starter, but it seems like he's kind of in a timeshare right now. I think he's clearly the second best receiver on the team, but we need better usage from him if you want to keep treating him as a flex option.
Yeah, I thought there were major issues along the Giants' offensive line, run blocking and pass protecting, and we'll see if the Bears can take advantage of that and go to 2-0 on the season. Okay, shifting over. Atlanta Falcons on the road against the Dallas Cowboys, who are 4.5-point favorites here. Total, massive total of 52.5. John Daigle, we entered week one thinking that the Dallas Cowboys could be one of the best offenses in the NFL. They still have potentially and probably the best wide receiver trio in the NFL. And we saw what Russell Wilson did to this Atlanta Falcons secondary in week one. So I'm assuming we are incredibly optimistic about Dak and company here in week two.
We are, even though they did look poor against the Rams, they still operated at the league's fastest pace in neutral game script. So again, against the Falcons, who, as we thought, as Hayden wrote about in the offseason, did pass the ball at the league's fifth highest rate in neutral game script, did pass the ball at the league's fourth highest rate in week one when trailing. We should expect to see fireworks in this game. And I think you can confidently go back to Michael Gallup, who we wouldn't even be discussing or be concerned with if he didn't get called for that penalty on the final play. And more importantly, CeeDee Lamb, who now enters weekly wide receiver 3 conversations with Blake Jarwin out the picture.
Yeah, I mean, what did we say about the Cowboys? Because, the setup, the Rams defense, didn't really know what to expect. It completely new, Sean McVay, bro, and as the defensive coordinator, and not necessarily a stars and scrubs defense, but just a defense what we didn't know what to expect from. And, they've really took it to the Cowboys, and one of the most disappointing performances of all of week one. But, the setup is so – Russell Wilson, I think, had 4 incompletions against the Falcons, and – we know that he was allowed to cook for the first time in his life, but you would still hope as a defense you could force more than 4 incompletions. So it's as much as I tried to conjure pessimism there for the Cowboys, it's very difficult in this spot, and it should be an all systems go bounce back.
I think we got answers real quick. I think we got answers just from the receiver, how they're going to be treated. CeeDee Lamb was 90% in the slot in week one, so that's really good news for his outlook. And then Daigle said, I'm not too concerned with Michael Gallup as long as he gets a few more targets, a few more air yards this week. It's all systems go for this team. It's probably the best offense of the week.
And Gallup is clear.
I was going to ask about the usage, so I'm glad you outlined it between those 3 wide receivers. Hayden, Daigle, what do you think of this Atlanta Falcons offense? We know that Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley are must plays every single week. We saw Russell Gage really eat up some garbage time. I don't think you can rely on that week in, week out. We saw Todd Gurley have some solid runs, but he's still no superstar Todd Gurley anymore. And then Hayden Hurst just didn't have the type of volume that we expected to step into that Austin Hooper role that he occupied last year.
Yeah, it was Ridley who scored 2 touchdowns, but Julio still led the team in air yards. So, of course, I'm still high on Julio. You still have to be high on Ridley, who we talked about as a must-have player back in June even on this podcast. And then I loved what you said about Hayden Hurst usage in the recap pod Sunday night. I didn't even think about that Seattle's beefed up secondary would of course be better against tight ends, and thus the production leaked to Russell Gage in week one. Whereas Hayden Hurst ran the most routes among the league's tight ends in week one. So I love Hayden Hurst for a bounce back spot here as well.
Yeah, I do too. Leighton Vander Esch out, and then you have Jalen Smith who didn't have a good week one. And then we know that the Cowboys secondary is still questions. Like if the Cowboys are going to get after the Falcons, it's going to have to be in their front four pass rushers, right, Pat?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what John said about what I said, incepting myself, is that the Seahawks were already tough against tight ends. And then to add Jamal Adams, who was just wrecking the game basically last week, it was just a real tough setup for Hayden Hurst. But I mean, his one big play, a 27-yard catch, I mean, he got a step on both Shaq Griffin and Jamal Adams, made a diving 27-yard catch. So it was just a bad stat line. And like Josh, like you said, Leighton Vander Esch now for the Cowboys. I mean, Hayden Hurst definitely deserves a mulligan on week one. And I said this to you, Josh. I say this as someone who wasn't even – I was kind of a Hayden Hurst fader over the summer. So, like, I could have looked to cling to this game as like a Hayden Hurst, like, we were all wrong about Hayden Hurst game. But it's just that is not the takeaway from week one for Hayden Hurst.
Yeah, Vegas must be listening. The total even rose to 53.5 as we were talking. You all can check out the live odds, especially on PointsBet, over at rotoworld.com/edge in that pull down. You know, it's 2 0-1 teams, and like 90% of 0-2 teams miss out in the playoffs. So neither of these teams, who probably are talent-wise available and potentially playoff caliber, need to win here in week two. Okay, moving on. We got the Detroit Lions going to the Green Bay Packers, favored by 6 points here. Total, the Packers are, with a total of 49.5. Hayden, I mean, conversations heading into week one, the football world was kind of fading, and even the Packers on some level were fading Aaron Rodgers, and look what he did to us against the Minnesota Vikings.
Well, there's off the field reasons, if you want to go down narrative street, why Aaron Rodgers is especially angry this year. But I think the storyline of week one was Green Bay was 6th in neutral situation pass rate. And I thought that there was some reasons to believe that was going to come down from last year. But I think that this just means Davante Adams is clearly the number one fantasy receiver, and it's not even really close. And I think that you can make an argument that he's a top 5 overall fantasy asset moving forward. He led with 32 expected fantasy points. Second closest was down at 23. The Lions corners have no chance against Davante Adams. I think there's 3 corners that are on the injury report right now for Detroit. So this is all systems go for Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams.
Yeah, John was talking about last week how like unsettled the Vikings cornerback group was and how Davante Adams went nuts against them. But yes, Hayden just said now he gets another cornerback group that is completely unsettled that he can go nuts against. And hey, I was very shocked by the neutral rate passing script too, like you were. But I mean, Davante Adams, in some ways, he's being used in like that extension of the run game type of way. Not like, I'm not saying he's being like full on used as like a gadget player or whatever, but like just relentlessly with these short targets. And there's basically zero reason to expect a down. I mean, not anything different for Davante Adams this week. It's another smash spot for Davante Adams.
It seemed like 50% the Vikings secondary being one we target weekly in fantasy, and 50% Rodgers being pissed off and a surgeon. Why I mentioned Allen Lazard and Marquez Valdes-Scantling as well in the waiver wire column is because although we question Rodgers' MVP-like performance continuing, the fact is the Packers, over their next 6 games, they play this week the Lions, the Saints in the Superdome, the Falcons, the Texans, and then the Vikings again. So it sets up to be a really easy opening schedule for all of these players as well.
I mean, it was true vintage Aaron Rodgers, and I think a massive development versus what we've seen in the last 2 or so years is that he did incorporate more wide receivers than just Davante Adams. I mean, that throw he had downfield to Marquez Valdes-Scantling, I believe it was right before halftime, was absolutely incredible. Allen Lazard was getting some manufactured touches, some awesome completions, and some design work from that offense from Matt LaFleur. I want to see it because when Aaron Rodgers is among the top 5 quarterbacks in the league, I think the league is better because he just has, just this aura. Just this way about him that no one else can play the position like it. And it was so cool to see that once again in week one when we hadn't seen that, it felt like, in years. Hayden, I do want to ask you about the Lions because we talked about it when Matthew Stafford was healthy last year. This was a top 5 offense in the NFL. Kenny Galladay missed week one. There were some high moments. There were some low moments. And it's kind of trending as we record this on Thursday. That doesn't seem like Kenny Galladay at the very best is going to be 100% on Sunday.
Yeah, and that still didn't prevent the Lions from finishing third in neutral pass rate last week. They passed the ball at a 67% clip. That was 13% higher than it was last season. And I think that this offense just set up to pass. Yes, Adrian Peterson looked good, but they got some production out of DeAndre Swift. He had a couple of terrible drops, but he actually has that passing down role, which is encouraging for his long-term projection. And then Marvin Jones definitely needs to be considered like a wide receiver 3 instead like a wide receiver 2 in these matchups, even with Kenny Golladay out. He's just probably not a true possession receiver. And then TJ Hawkinson will be like an upside tight end 2 play. He didn't have the production that we kind of hoped for as a breakout candidate. But overall, this is just going to be one of the most pass-heavy teams in the league.
Quintus Cephas will be a plug and play, assuming Golladay is out again. He hasn't practiced here as we were recording on Thursday after leading the team in target share and air yards. But Marcus Valdez-Scantling and Alan Lazard, those are legitimately like flex options over some less confident RB3s you can play this week in a great matchup.
I know there are a bunch of running back injuries. I'm not so sure if I would love starting Adrian Peterson this week, despite the workload that he got last week. It certainly sets up for more of a DeAndre Swift campaign. We talked about that in the Denny and Pat pod, that if he had caught that game-winning touchdown, the narrative of his rookie performance would have been much different. But now that he didn't, he's a little bit under the radar. Oh, right. Let's go to the team that Green Bay destroyed last week. That is the Minnesota Vikings going to the Indianapolis Colts, with the Colts as 3-point favorites at home, a total of 48.5. Pat, what were your thoughts on Phillip Rivers' first game as a Colt?
I mean, it was just kind of like the full Phillip Rivers experience. It was mostly efficient game, moving the ball at a nice clip, a nice YPA, a nice completion percentage, and then just the dunder-headed mistakes kind of unraveling all of it at the end. And I mean, I was happy. I was maybe a little dismayed to see Nyheim Hines like following through on his Austin Eckler destiny. I was happy to see Paris Campbell get a big target share, be kind of a nice target Phillip Rivers can use in a variety of different ways. I was pretty surprised Mike Williams, was so ready to go after how all over the map the injury reports were on him. But what I saw from Phillip Rivers is basically a quarterback who can still have some useful fantasy weeks. And I mean, we know that he's to the point where I'd say he's almost a better fantasy than real life quarterback. And he's not a great fantasy quarterback, of course, at this point either. But, it's not a bad matchup this week. An exploitable defense we just saw, basically not be on the field, it seemed like at times, against Aaron Rodgers last weekend. Phillip Rivers is basically never going to be a QB1 at this point, but he's a great, he could be like a week winner in Superflex, basically. Maybe we're getting too deep into the weeds there, but
I think it's an incredible matchup this week. I mean,
yes.
I think it's beyond a not bad matchup. I think it's an incredible one. And I think last week that he looked like he'd been in this offense for years. Now, you talked about a couple of those mistakes, and it's both interceptions are throws he absolutely wants back. And the first one just looked like he threw like a wounded duck, Daigle. And it looked like just his arm failed him. And I guess that
happened all the time last year too.
Right. And I guess you can just chalk that up to old age and all that kind of stuff. But the rest of the time, he looked perfectly in sync. And outside routes to T.Y. Hilton, his timing with Paris Campbell over the middle field was great. Those screens to Nyheim Hines were perfectly designed. That's one of those games, thinking back to last week, that if you just didn't show me the score and you just showed me like between the 20s plays, I would have told you the Colts smashed the Jaguars.
And 2 of those ducks he threw were just drops by T.Y. Hilton, who admitted he should have caught them. The Vikings defense, again, one we're targeting weekly, they blitzed at the league's 4th highest rate, but got pressure at the league's lowest and allowed the 2nd most yards per play on the week. And this is actually the same attack they're playing this week. Rodgers got rid of the ball, time from snap to throw, at the fastest pace, whereas Rivers was quietly the 2nd fastest pace in the league. And he's arguably surrounded by better playmakers and with the Colts than the Chargers last year. So all he needs to do is dump the ball off, as he did for 17 running back targets in week 1, and his players go make plays. So he's a top streamer. He's like arguably a fringe QB1 this week.
I called him a 300-yard candidate in my column, and I just think that that's just because the Colts had the 4th highest neutral pass rate, and they have the playmakers. A lot of these carries that would have been carries last year with the Colts are going to be little screens. Jonathan Taylor looked like a freak out in open space last week. That was really encouraging because one of the few knocks on his draft profile, which was really elite, was his ability to catch passes. He looked very comfortable there in week 1. So I think that's the difference between whether he's going to be a high-end RB2 the rest of the year, or a low end or mid range RB1. I want to be buying Jonathan Taylor for sure.
Pat, where did you have Nyheim Hines? Because I would start him over Mark Ingram. I would start him over so many RB2s confidently this week.
It's like RB28. I do have him over Mark Ingram, actually. I've got Mark Ingram down at RB33. So, yeah, I mean, Hines, I just think Phil's like going to make this happen. And just circling back to Phil, the only two questions were, so Hayden, you talked about like the neutral passing rate, in neutral situations, how high the Colts pass rate was last week, and they were playing from behind almost the entire game. So it's a little, well, maybe they weren't. What was it was like tied or basically they were not playing with a big lead. And just how much of the Vikings performance, we know it's an undermanned defense right now, but how much of that was Aaron Rodgers? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Phillip Rivers came out and made even an undermanned Vikings defense look a little bit better than they looked last week. So I just don't consider Phillip Rivers like a plug and play QB1 this week. He's like in the QB 17-18 range.
Interesting. Yeah, I think there are 5 solid starts, and Phillip Rivers is one of them. We mentioned T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell, and then both running backs, obviously, for the Colts. We haven't said anything about the Minnesota Vikings. Hayden, did you see the quote from Jay Gruden that someone found on Twitter about Kirk Cousins saying that, he and Kirk would get in arguments because Kirk would basically say, hey, I want someone open on every single passing play. And if it's not, he just like shrugs his shoulders and gets upset. Well, guess what? If Adam Thielen doesn't get open, no one's getting open on this offense. And that was the concern in week 1. That was my concern heading in to week 1. And it absolutely showed itself. I am terrified that if this Minnesota Vikings team gets behind by a touchdown, they are not the type of roster construction that can lead them back out of it. And sure, with that defensive line, with the running game that they have, maybe there'll be some games like that. I don't think I can point to this one and say, yeah, I'm really excited about playing anyone other than Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook against the Colts.
We'll see how this plays out, but the Vikings might have the fewest amount of fantasy rosterable players this year, and that's because the Vikings were last in neutral pass rate, down at 31%. That would have been even lower than the Ravens last year, and they also played at the third slowest pace. So it's not a good recipe for any fantasy production. 54% of the air yards went to Adam Thielen. He's a top 10 fantasy receiver for the rest of the year. And then Dalvin Cook is being Dalvin Cook. So outside of that, you can forget about anybody. The Irv Smith hype gone.
Pieces. Oh my
Justin
gosh.
Jefferson didn't play that much. BC Johnson's not an NFL caliber starter. So it's rough.
I will say the Packers have had Kirk Cousins' number too. They erased him off the face of the earth last year. So maybe it's just a really bad matchup for Kirk Cousins. And I will say too, for some reason in my mind's eye, the Colts were trailing by 3-7 the whole game, but yeah, they were winning by 3.
Have you been still thinking about that this entire 5 minutes of monologue?
Yeah, I was fixated on it.
That's just a podcasting moment, Pat. That's all come back to haunt us, and you'll think about it all night too. I've been there. I've absolutely been there. All right. Let's go over to the Buffalo Bills going down to Miami with being 5-point favorites. The Bills are on the road, a total of 48.5 here. Daigle, the Bills led the NFL in 4 wide receiver sets last week, ran at 25% of their snaps. That's compared to just 4 total snaps in 4 wide receiver sets in 2019. Dare I say that Brian Daboll is maybe one of the best self-scouters, best self-evaluators in the NFL so far, and his trajectory is very much on the rise during his time in Buffalo.
And let's not misconstrue them using 4 wide receivers as a way to get Josh Allen to pass the ball. What they are doing in passing at the league's 3rd highest rate in neutral game script is just getting the ball in Josh Allen's hands and spreading out the defense. It's not a pass if Josh Allen has the ball 100% of the time because he breaks the code. Josh Allen ran the ball at a career high 14 times. He had 60 touches, so 46 attempts and 14 carries because the ball was in his hands in a spread offense. It is literally genius. It's the best way to utilize Josh Allen. So it is to the moon. I was wrong last week. I thought he didn't have a ceiling in that particular game script if the offense can't answer the Bills defense. And again, I was wrong because Josh Allen is rocket shipping right now.
Lucky for you, Daigle, in the summer you were all aboard it, so you can be right and wrong at the exact same time, and the listeners have no idea which one to choose. So good for you. Hayden, my question to you is this, though. Against the New York Jets, we know that their corners are absolutely the biggest weakest link on that defense. What Daigle mentioned is true, that even when you put 4 wide receivers out there, doesn't mean you have to throw every single time, but Josh Allen still did attempt 46 passes. I would say it's the opposite for the Miami Dolphins, where the Miami's corners are probably their best asset, their best position group on defense. So do we think that Brian Daboll switches it up, and this could be a Devin Singletary and Zach Moss game up the middle?
Well, I think going back to last week, the Bills ran the most plays, and I think that is kind of a opponent stat. The Jets couldn't move the ball on offense, and they couldn't get any stops on defense. So that's going to really increase the play volume for the Bills. I still think that whatever the Bills were doing was working, and I think that will continue working, even just masking Josh Allen's inconsistencies. They really spread the ball around too. John Brown and Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley were all top 30 receivers in fantasy usage, and then also Zach Moss and Devin Singletary top 15 in running back usage. So I'm just kind of worried about how the ball is going to get distributed, if it's just going to be too flat for everybody when the Bills aren't running 81 plays.
81 plays, that's really kind of shocking. I mean, again, the only coming up with bad like counterpoints. I mean, the Jets though they appeared to have already quit on the season, which is maybe a new record in week 1. But it was a very, very dispiriting. And I've already said my Josh Allen should be like 3 times this week. It was the best game I've ever seen him play by far. To me, he looked more like I keep using this line over and over again, but he looked like a genuine playmaker as opposed to just a toolsy player who sometimes make plays. Like he looked like an actual playmaker on every snap. I mean, he was dangerous. But the mistakes, though, it's not like he cleaned it up. The mistakes were still there. 2 third down sacks, 2 lost fumbles, 2 missed touchdowns. The one John Brown in the end zone got all the attention. He had Cole Beasley for like a 60-yard touchdown and underthrew it. It was a completion, thankfully. But so he had a big margin for error against the Jets. He still has a margin for error against the Dolphins. But Josh, like you said, that Dolphins secondary is much better equipped than the Jets is.
It is, but I don't know what position group you can stack up the Bills and the Dolphins and say, oh, the Dolphins are much better in this area. Maybe like their depth at cornerback, but still secondary as a whole, I would still go with the Bills. Daigle, 5.5 to me, I'd be all over the Bills in this scenario. I mean, every which way they win, every which way they are ahead of what the Dolphins can bring to the table. And speaking of this Dolphins offense, I mean, I know we barely want to talk about it because they did nothing last week.
Yeah.
I was surprised not to, compete here with another NBC product, but PFT only had the Dolphins as like the 26th in their power rankings. Like they should be 32. I mean, there was no quarterback worse in the NFL in week 1, in my opinion, than Ryan Fitzpatrick. He was horrific.
The Jets are 32, but so you mean 31.
I mean, the Dolphins were trash. They were really, really bad.
Did you see the Jets?
Yeah, I watched every game this week. I think both should be tied for 32, and then everyone else should not be relegated. Both of those, send them down to the championship, Pat.
To Pat's point, all of those mistakes for Josh Allen, and yet the number 3 player overall in fantasy last week. So just imagine when it all clicks, what's happening for the Dolphins.
I would say it did all click. I mean, he's never going to have better game script than that. It's very rarely going to have better matchups than that.
I mean, a competitive game script and they're spreading the ball out. That's better.
He got to be unleashed from the opening whistle. I mean, there's going to be – I think the coaster is here to stay, basically, is kind of what I was saying. I mean, I haven't ranked as a QB6 this week for obvious reasons. But it was not like a Josh Allen has, like, solved this, to me, game. It was definitely the best game I've ever seen him play. I can't deny that at all. He was playing a gear faster than he was last year.
Preston Williams, the only player you can even consider, and that's a desperate flex because he's getting Tre'Davious Light. But that's literally the only player for Miami you want to touch.
Hopefully a more competitive matchup, but probably not. The San Francisco 49ers go to the New York Jets. The 49ers on the road, 7-point favorites, a teeny tiny total of 42 in this one. Hayden, Jimmy Garoppolo showed some of his weaknesses. We keep talking about that with a lot of other quarterbacks. He's a bit late in throws. The velocity just wasn't there. He did the hokey pokey about 3 times to take a second and goal sack, or a first and goal sack, I believe it was. Look, this team was one of the most injured throughout training camp. We saw that in blurbs. And then in week 1, they continue to get injured with George Kittle, and he might not be on track to play on Sunday. However, a little positive, it seems like Brandon Ayuk is going to make his rookie debut.
Yeah, he expects it, and he was a full participant on Wednesday already. So he's going to be the guy, and George Kittle is going to be a game time decision here. He's not going to practice because Garoppolo basically sent Kittle to get his knee completely replaced on that high target. So that's a potential concern. The one thing is Raheem Mostert. He looks really, really good. They're 7.5-point favorites. He was a couple inches away from a couple really long runs as well. So we have to kind of decide, was Tevin Coleman's usage from week 1 because of the air quality, or was that just how they want to set up the offense? If the latter is true, Raheem Mostert deserves to be like a top 15, top 20 running back for the rest of the season. Well, I think we're going to quickly find out if Tevin Coleman is only going to get 6 carries and a couple snaps, or if he's going to be involved.
I thought Raheem Mostert and Jerick McKinnon were fantastic. Like, Jerick McKinnon was just missed Pat on a couple throws. And, I'm not saying that everyone's desperate heading into week 2, but I think Jerick McKinnon is clearly ahead of Tevin Coleman on this pecking order.
I would say so too. Is he ahead of Myles Gaskin on a waiver claiming order? I'm sorry, just derailing the conversation.
Yes, he is.
And Myles Gaskin might at least stay healthy. Raheem Mostert is the top 15 back this week. I do think he'll be a top 15 back. Maybe not the rest of the season. Maybe more top 20 still rest of the season. But it spoke. I made this point already. I keep making the same points over and over again. But when the 49ers caved to Raheem Mostert following his trade, it's not like they fully caved, but they still enhanced his contract, and they didn't have to do that. He had zero leverage whatsoever. To me, that just spoke to how important they knew that he was. So I wasn't surprised to see him, riding the clear lead back in week 1. And now it's a great match. It is weird. The 49ers, typically, even against a truly horrible Jets team, this would be like a classic letdown. Well, not a letdown because they lost week 1, but trekking to the East Coast, so banged up. This would typically be a spot where you'd be tempted to do the Jets, but I don't think any of us can possibly go down.
It's funny you say that, Pat.
Oh, no,
because the upset of the week got off to a 1-0 start, so it would be a shame for it to come to a halt in week 2. But the stars align. The 49ers traveling with only 2 healthy corners, a cluster of injuries against the Jets. And the one thing they did do well against the Bills is stuff the run. Bills running backs, 18 carries for 41 yards, because that's all they intend on stopping. I don't believe in Garoppolo in this spot. I don't believe in Brandon Ayuk, although I believe in him long-term, not 1 week off of a hamstring injury. I like the Jets.
Okay.
It sucks.
Nope. I'm gonna go against you here, Dago, and I think the world is too. Because Jimmy Garoppolo did not have to play well to have a pretty good stat line last week, and that speaks to Kyle Shanahan. The only reason to me why San Francisco lost is because they came up against a special player or 2 of them in Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins. The New York Jets, on their entire roster, offensively and defensively, don't have a single special player, and a special player is going to need to step up in order to beat this Kyle Shanahan-led team. I just don't see it happening. Simply do not see it happening. Even despite all the things you listed going against the 49ers and this offseason going so far against the 49ers, Javon Kinlaw looked great. Like, Arik Armstead's going to come back. Like, this pass rush, I think, with the Jets' reconstructed offensive line this offseason, Daigle, is going to be a major mismatch against this 49ers front.
Jets +7 for lunch.
Okay.
I'll say the final nail in the no upset coffin, maybe they'll cover. But were you saying cover or like outright win, by the way?
He says outright win.
I'll say outright win for the pod, but for Josh, I'm taking my 7 points and running away scared.
The final nail might be Jamison Crowder's apparently going to be like highly questionable. And if that's true, yeah. There's just no chance.
I know what I said. Don't worry. I'll gladly admit defeat next week. I know what I said, though.
Jamison Crowder, if his hamstring is healthy, which it does not seem like is the case, he did not practice on Thursday. 37% target share. He was wide receiver 7 in fantasy usage last week. It's not going to be pretty, but when he's out there, he's a top 24 PPR option.
The LA Rams go
injured scoring the slowest. Sorry, Josh. He got injured scoring the slowest 69-yard touchdown in NFL history.
It was -5 ADOT and 69-yard touchdown.
So glad we got that comment in. All right, the Los Angeles Rams go to the Philadelphia Eagles. The Rams are 1-point favorites on the road, 45.5 total. Hayden, I will turn to you first. What a disappointment Philly was. Offensive line issues. Hopefully Lane Johnson comes back. Just nothing going with Jalen Reagor. Overthrows to Deshaun Jackson. Is this just what Carson Wentz is? And could we see those same issues pop up against the likes of Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey?
It was an offense that was like really trying. First in neutral pass rate up at 75%. But they just didn't have the talent to do anything with it. And that was because of the offensive line. They need Lane Johnson back. They need Miles Sanders back. Luckily, he was a full participant on Wednesday. He's expected to play. I'm not convinced that the Eagles are going to be able to stop Aaron Donald on the inside this week, and that is a major problem here. I think Miles Sanders belongs in the top 15, but the Deshaun Jackson, the Jalen Reagors, I'm not sure if you want to be starting those guys as flex plays this week. And then, of course, Zach Ertz versus Dallas Goedert. We need Dallas Goedert to steal some targets from Zach Ertz, who just keeps catching the ball and falling over like he's Jason Witten.
I wish we were told beforehand that Deshaun Jackson would be on a pitch count. But alas, we were told 24 hours later when it didn't matter, and that was extremely frustrating. But we were expecting him to progressively play more in this game. Carson Wentz had the highest air yards per attempt last week, and so Lane Johnson is the key here. If we get Lane Johnson back and a little more time for Carson Wentz, although I think the Rams are the top streaming defense of the week because they're guaranteed a handful of sacks, I still like Deshaun Jackson and Jalen Reagor and Carson Wentz.
I mean, even with Lane Johnson hopefully playing, this is I have Miles Sanders as my RB1, like a number of redraft leagues. And now we've kind of got like the double whammy of coming back from a hamstring injury and behind, offensive line that just got caved in last week. And I before week 1, when I thought Miles Sanders was going to play, I had him ranked as like the RB 9 or 10. And now this week, even with a full week of practice, it's basically like the RB 15 or 16. Very concerning situation for someone who had a lot of draft capital invested in him. And I mean, it's concerning enough, even if Lane Johnson does play. If he doesn't play, I mean, we're getting into an outright scary type situation, and maybe should be faded even further to like the RB 18 to 20 range. The Eagles, very much an on-the-spot offense.
Hayden, what do you think of the Rams offense? I mean, it came out with a great script, I thought, against the Cowboys. Jared Goff was in his flow, and we know when there's good blocking and he's on schedule, Jared Goff can have great placement and make some incredible passes. As the game went along, I thought that went away a little bit, but by that time, Robert Woods was incredibly involved, so on and so forth. We can keep going down the list, and Malcolm Brown had another great first game of the season, and I bet this year it continues much more than it did last year.
It was a very conservative game plan. Robert Woods somehow only had 18 air yards off of like 10 targets. Jared Goff was just kept throwing the ball like behind the line of scrimmage to him. But yeah, I think Malcolm Brown, you have to keep him into the RB2 mix. He deserved it last week. He's the goal line back for now. I think Cam Akers has some work cut out for him to earn that role, which was a very big surprise. He looked smaller than I expected, and Malcolm Brown looked better than expected. So that's a problem here.
All right, I guess we move on. We go to the Denver Broncos, going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers as 7.5-point favorites here. Pat, as the resident big, massive Drew Lock fan, I'll throw this out to you, courtesy of Rich Rebar. In his 6 starts, Drew Lock has just 1 performance above quarterback 20. That's a bad trickle down to Jerry Jeudy. We saw Noah Fant have an explosive game and still be somewhat limited as a football player. And I guess Cortland Sutton hopefully is going to return in this one. But that's not the stat line that you want going against this Pittsburgh Steelers defense that, Pat, I think is going to tie up the loose ends that they allowed to Daniel Jones and company last week.
I mean, week 1 was low on catchable balls from Drew Lock. Very banged up receiver core, but that's not going to change for week 2. I mean, it appears KJ Hamler is going to play, but Cortland Sutton seems to be on the wrong side of questionable. And the Titans defense is a good defense. As we know, the Steelers are an order of magnitude better. And Drew Lock is just playing the game just a beat or two too slow right now. And it's just going to be extremely difficult for him to get any momentum to kind of turn week 1 around without Cortland Sutton. And even if Cortland Sutton does play at this point, I mean, he just had a shoulder popped back in last week. He's going to be on a snap count. It'll be after a week where he had very limited practice reps. And yeah, I mean, it's like a race to the bottom this week in the QB rankings between Sam Darnold and Drew Lock. You basically can't go wrong in the 32 spot.
I do think Sutton being around, though, hinders Noah Fant's target share. He averaged fewer than 3 targets per game, and Drew Lock's 5 starts last year, and then suddenly exploded for 8 on Monday night. So I would still start Fant, of course, because tight end is a hellscape that I hate ranking every single week, but I would be worried if Sutton is back.
Hayden, any thoughts on this Pittsburgh Steelers offense? I mean, I thought Deontay Johnson might have had his worst game from like an eye test perspective, and he still finished with like 6 receptions for 57 yards. I thought Ben Roethlisberger to start the game looked like a little bit of Jake Delhomme after Tommy John surgery, but like as the game went along, it was just clear to me that this offense just has way too many receivers to be average this year.
Yeah, I think we can throw out the 2019 stats, and I think we can throw out the 2018 stats as well. This was an offense that was a little more conservative. I think we're seeing Big Ben is going to be checking the ball down more so than ever because the offensive line isn't quite as good as it once was, and just he doesn't want to be taking hits like he was previously. His yards per target or air yards per target is way down. The pass rate was down, so I think that we're going to see a little bit lower volume than typical. But I think Big Ben can still get there just because Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, James Washington, Chase Claypool made a play. They have 2 tight ends, and then Benny Snell looked a lot better. He dropped 10 pounds in the offseason, and I think that's the big difference for Benny Snell.
Team did lose their starting right tackle and right guard. Dago, I need to ask you, as Mr. Waiver, what if James Conner doesn't play? Where does someone like Benny Snell stack up? Because, again, a lot of people have running back questions and concerns after week 1. Should they have any confidence here as 7.5-point home favorites?
I believe I was lowest on him in the industry and picking him up because I don't think people understand the headache that comes with picking up Benny Snell if Connor is cleared or only out a few weeks. Even if it's a 1-week spot start, this defense, although Fangio doesn't know how to use timeouts, he can coach up a front 7. They just limited Derrick Henry to 3.7 yards per carry and 3.8 yards per touch. And what people aren't noticing is that Jalen Samuels came in on passing downs for Benny Snell in that game. So I worry about Benny Snell's ceiling despite looking good on Monday night. And Connor, I still think if he's healthy, best case scenario for him is the bell cow. Worst case scenario, if he's healthy, he's still mixed in behind Benny Snell. So it's a conundrum that I would personally just rather avoid, honestly.
Okay.
I think Connor's going to sit. Benny Snell, the opportunity is good enough. I have him as the RB20. Even like you said, in a defensive line that fully contained Derrick Henry. I think the game script will be too positive. Jalen Samuels did mix in on passing downs, but he is a failed experiment on early downs. And Ben Roethlisberger with the arm was I think he's really got something like that 2012 to 2014 Peyton arm going on where it's just not going to be the same. But he's got such a good sense of timing. He has such a good sense of touch that he's going to find a way to make it work. But it definitely did not appear to be the same Ben Roethlisberger arm.
Carolina Panthers go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Both teams are 0-1. The Bucs are 8.5-point favorites, 47 total in this one. Hayden, what do you think of Tom Brady's debut? I thought the high points were Tom Brady to Scotty Miller and Tom Brady to Chris Godwin, and there wasn't much else to get excited about throughout the game.
It was a team that was just not on the same page. And I think that you can chalk that up to the training camp, a new offense, and some injuries. Chris Godwin left late with a concussion. It seems like he's going to be missing this week just because his symptoms came on late. I think that's bad news for him. Mike Evans is clearly working through a hamstring injury, but he's going to be force-fed the ball in a perfect situation here against the Carolina Panthers. I think it's probably the youngest defense in the league, one of the worst defenses, if not the worst defense in the league. So I think you have to go back to the well with Mike Evans. I do not think you have to go back to the well with Rob Gronkowski, who just didn't offer anything, and I think O.J. Howard is going to be outplaying him this year.
The Panthers missed the second most tackles in the league on defense last week, and that's why we are going back to Mike Evans. Bruce Arians came out on Wednesday and said, we can't have Evans get fewer than 10 targets. And the last time he saw fewer than 5 targets was actually last year in a game against the Saints against Marshawn Lattimore, who shut him down last week. And the game after that last year, he actually was force-fed 17 targets. So I would imagine we see a high number of targets again for Mike Evans, whether it's redraft or DFS. I am going all in because the Bucs, even in being implied to score the 3rd highest team total this week, it should be higher.
He basically personally slathered the grease onto the squeaky wheel. Yeah, he said he quote unquote feels bad anytime he gets fewer than 10 targets, and also criticized himself for not moving him around the formation more. And it's weird. Hayden kind of alluded to it. I mean, Mike Evans was saying some very not chill stuff about his hamstring on Thursday. He said last week they only thought he had a 25% chance to play in week 1. And he said he hadn't run full speed until the game, and that basically that it felt bad. But thankfully he somehow avoided setbacks. And, with no Chris Godwin against the Panthers defense, we really can't overthink. After what Bruce Arians said, especially, we can't overthink it. And to me, I've got him ranked as the wide receiver 5 right now, which feels maybe like a bit too rich, but they need it to happen. They've said they're going to try to make it happen. He somehow avoided setbacks. So it is, even with the reasons to worry, it's basically a green light spot.
I'm curious where you have Ronald Jones, because I think the game script makes sense here. The more people tweet out snap counts, the more important it becomes for us at the Rotoworld podcast to provide context to those snap counts. And although Ronald Jones only outsnapped LaShawn McCoy 33-25, he got 19 touches on those 33 snaps. And the Bucs led the league in run play rate and neutral game script. Yes, I do believe Leonard Fournette will be more involved here shortly, but I don't think his snap rate jumps from 13% to 50% in week 2. So if there is ever a time to play Ronald Jones as a strong RB2, it is this week.
Go ahead, Pat.
I have him ranked as the RB25, so right there is the RB2. And last week, so I'm basically choosing to believe Bruce Arians on Mike Evans, whereas last week I didn't believe him when he was talking about Ronald. I had Ronald Jones ranked higher than Leonard Fournette, but not a whole lot higher. And then he went out and used them exactly how he said he was going to. And I agree. Fournette is going to see the ball more, play more snaps this week. But Rojo was basically kind of a bright spot on an otherwise dismal day. And yeah, I think you have to leave him right on that RB2 periphery.
If you look over my left shoulder, you see Zach perked up by that Ronald Jones comment. Look, I mean, we make fun of Ronald Jones's ability in the past. I would say he's equally as talented as Leonard Fournette. Like Leonard Fournette, we need to forget that he was drafted in the top 5. Like neither is going to be a feature back at the NFL level, but Ronald Jones did nothing to dispel the confidence the team has in him. I'll also say that you could not get a bigger difference in quality of play between the Bucs rookie first-round pick and Tristan Wirfs at right tackle versus their left tackle in Donovan Smith, who was absolutely horrific in week 1. Yet it's not going to matter because this Panthers defense can get basically zero pressure on the opposing quarterback. Like Hayden mentioned, they are incredibly young. But Hayden, I also want to talk about this Panthers offense. It felt like Christian McCaffrey did nothing exceptional last week, yet we know he's automatic. We don't need to talk there. But this target distribution, to me, is what stood out, because Robbie Anderson in his past has been viewed as his vertical playmaker and a role player in that regard. Now it seems like all these 3 wide receivers for the Panthers are kind of interchangeable, and each could get anywhere from 7 to 10 targets on a weekly basis.
My fantasy usage model had DJ Moore as the wide receiver 13, Curtis Samuel as the wide receiver 32, and Robbie Anderson as the wide receiver 41. DJ Moore is actually a rebound candidate of mine. 9 targets, that's 25% share, and 100 air yards, that's 36% share. So I'm buying DJ Moore. I don't think it's the greatest matchup just because the Bucs want to play slow. They were bottom 5 in pace last week. But I think DJ Moore is going to hang around as a borderline wide receiver 1-2. I don't want to panic with him too much.
All right, let's go on over to the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Tennessee Titans. Minshew magic struck in week 1. I think at the most basic level, Daigle, we can explain Gardner Minshew as someone, I think he only attempted 20 passes, completed 19 of them, but he doesn't take sacks, but he's mobile and can create plays in just about out of nothing, I should say. Yet this Tennessee Titans team is probably going to run an offense that's much different than the Indianapolis Colts did last week. And we saw that no matter what, even if he averages 3.7 yards per carry, they're going to give the ball about 30 times to Derrick Henry.
Correct. And what's funny with the Titans offense is that they actually ran 78 plays on Monday night, and that was 20 more than what they averaged last year. And that's because they ran at the league's 6th fastest pace on offense. So that not only leaves upside for Derrick Henry here, who handled 100% of the team's backfield touches, 34, which was his 2nd highest mark at his entire career, but it leaves upside for A.J. Brown if he's healthy, and Corey Davis if A.J. Brown can't go. That's why we saw 2 players, Jonnu Smith and Corey Davis, get there on Monday night, because there's now more opportunity for that. So I do think Ryan Tannehill is in a sneaky streaming spot here in week 2.
It was weird with the Titans game flow in week 1. I mean, were they going to come close? I mean, I guess maybe they'll play faster this year, but I mean, so much of that game flow is, them killing drives with missed field goals, and then the Broncos putting up so little resistance. I mean, the Broncos could have put that game away like 4 or 5 different times, and they were just so bad and just kept giving the Titans one opportunity after another. And it was hard for me to have firm takeaways. 43 attempts for Ryan Tannehill and only 8 targets for A.J. Brown. I mean, that was definitely one of the more disappointing stat lines of week 1. Jonnu Smith thankfully got 7 targets, got a touchdown, kind of right where he needs to be for like the tight end 12 to 15 range. That was the kind of usage you want to see from him. But other than I was really hoping this would be the year there'd be no games with Derrick Henry from the opening whistle. They were just going to feed him. They did do that. You said 34 touches, but I had a hard time coming away with like sweeping takeaways from the Titans. What was just a bizarre game, I thought.
I'm a little bit nervous, Hayden, that this Tennessee Titans defensive line is just going to destroy the Jaguars offensive line. Now, it might not lead to sacks, but it might lead to a long day for Gardner Minshew. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney came in, played the most snaps along that Titans defensive line, was fantastic, I thought. And then Jeffrey Simmons, in just his second year, is already emerging as one of the more intriguing interior defensive linemen. And the Jaguars, while I thought James Robinson looked good, while Jay Gruden said Laviska Shenault is basically like his version of Mohamed Sanu, and obviously DJ Chark got his. I don't know if we can count on that much efficiency, 19 of 20 from the quarterback, to make all of those players relevant here in week 2.
I think the most bizarre stat I came across this week was the Jaguars had 89 air yards as a team in week 1. That was easily the worst in the league. This is just an offense that's going to get the ball out quick. They have all of the weapons to do so. Laviska Shenault was scheme touches. He ran a route on 62% of the dropbacks. I think that he is somebody that should be picked up in all formats. And then I think DJ Chark will end up coming back. There's no Adoree Jackson for the Titans here, so I think that this will not be a pretty offense, but I think that DJ Chark, you should still be starting, and I would not be wanting to start James Robinson or Chris Thompson here.
I was about to say, this is not James Robinson game script. I know he got 16 carries, but Chris Thompson was still the passing game back. That's what it seems like here.
Going to the 4 o'clock slate, the Washington football team, I almost did it. I caught myself. The Washington football team go to the Arizona Cardinals, 6.5-point favorites. The Cardinals are a total of 47, both 1-0. Pat, we saw it. Kyler Murray to DeAndre Hopkins. It must have been beautiful there in the RotoPat household to see the player that you were most excited for, DeAndre Hopkins, see 14 targets, 15 targets there in week 1 and just do wonders with them.
Career high 14 catches on 16 targets. Ooh. And I mean, I'm not really a victory lap type. This just was not surprising.
Do it.
But
well, I mean, it wasn't surprising. This was this is what they needed. This is why they had nowhere left at the end of last season to funnel targets to. Larry Fitzgerald's in his sunset years. Christian Kirk, I thought maybe he was injury related last year, but I mean, maybe Christian Kirk just isn't that great. Andy Isabella never got with the system. They don't have a legitimate tight end. Sorry to Dan Arnold truthers. Kenyon Drake even was very inconsistent as a pass catcher last year. And they just, an offense that wants to pass this much desperately needed somewhere where they could funnel the ball like at will. They desperately needed a true number 1 receiver. And then they aggressively went out and got him. And so, I just was not surprised. I mean, I was not predicting a career high 14 catches. But to me, this was just such a perfect marriage of talent and need, where DeAndre Hopkins still in his prime. We know one of the biggest target hogs in NFL history. And it was just, such a humongous need for this Cardinals offense.
Diego, did you unplug your headphones for that so Evan could hear it throughout the sound speakers throughout his place? No, you didn't? I would have. I would have.
You should have seen him watching the game. I'll leave out how far the phone traveled across the room.
Hayden, what'd you think of Antonio Gibson's usage on Washington? Because there wasn't much of it in week 1.
0% touch share with a lead, but while they were trailing, that was up at 21%. This is the game script for Antonio Gibson to have his breakout game. They're 7-point road underdogs here, and I think that this game will have the most plays of the week. There was a podcast I kept hearing this offseason that kept saying the Washington football team is going to be a much faster pace offense. They were 31st in neutral situation pace last year. They were 3rd in neutral situation pace last week. The Cardinals remained as a top 5 unit there as well. So I think that you're going to want some pieces to this game. Terry McLaurin bounced back. I think Antonio Gibson has some breakout appeal. Logan Thomas, tight end 2 fantasy usage last week. He had to be one of Daigle's number 1 waiver wire options of the week. And then, of course, start your DeAndre Hopkins, Kyler Murray's, and the running backs.
And those are the two key players for me buying low in this offense. Christian Kirk, who I don't want to lose track of, because as Rich Rebar said on Twitter, he was sacrificed to the Wolves. He ran routes only at Richard Sherman and allowed DeAndre Hopkins free on the other side. And then Logan Thomas, Cardinals last year allowed catches, receiving yards, touchdowns, the most to tight ends. And here is Washington's leader in target share and air yards, right to go in week 2.
I'll say this about Antonio Gibson. I mean, it was a disappointing game, but he only played 18 snaps and he touched the ball on 11 of them. So they at least kind of forced the issue with Antonio Gibson, and nowhere to go for that but up.
And if you watch that Cardinals 49ers game, you saw how much Isaiah Simmons struggled immediately against George Kittle blocking, against covering Raheem Mostert on that angle route. I guarantee you Scott Turner saw that exact same thing. My biggest question, though, is with Washington. I didn't think it was Dwayne Haskins' best game, even though they did win the contest. It seems like he just has placement issues. Like he throws in the vicinity of receivers, but doesn't place it exactly where they can get the football. That is a bit concerning, but I think it can be enough, especially this week against Arizona. Okay, go ahead, Pat.
I was going to say, I know you're vehemently against asides, but I got to get the joke in that maybe the Cardinals should start drafting defensive players that actually have positions. That might be a good drafting philosophy. Take a player that has a position.
The videos are worth watching alone for when Pat likes to make jokes. I mean, Josh wants to downplay my main strength as a podcaster. He apparently doesn't believe in asides or jokes, but he's going to have to learn to live with them, I would say.
We've worked together for 7 years, Pat. It's just part of my life. It's part of my life. I love it. I love working with you, Pat. Speaking of, we get to see more of Pat on Sunday. It's our live show. Yes, Rotoworld Live at noon Eastern. It's on our Twitch. It's on our Periscope on the Rotoworld football account. It's on NBC Sports' YouTube page. We are there for 45 minutes going through odds, going through your lineups using our lineup tool. Again, check us out, 45 minutes on Rotoworld Live. Going to the next game, that is the Baltimore Ravens and the Houston Texans, a high total of 50 with Ravens 7-point favorites here on the road. Too much, too little, Hayden, because on paper, this is a team in the Ravens that absolutely destroyed the Texans last year and kept Deshaun Watson to 3.9 fantasy points.
I write up 5 of my favorite bets each week in my column. The Ravens as 7-point favorites will be one of those bets this week.
You.
The Texans they didn't look like they had any clue on offense after their first 15 plays, and they do not have enough talent in the secondary to keep up with Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews, who I think is definitely in the Travis Kelce, George Kittle tier. I think career high 87% routes in week 1. That was down at 61% last year. So Lamar Jackson, QB1, Mark Andrews competing for tight end 1, and then Marquise Brown is a home run threat as a wide receiver 2-3.
David Johnson gets the ball just so Bill O'Brien can prove he was right about the trade. And the Will Fuller better be able to separate from Marlon Humphrey because that's all they have in this offense. I know we had, I wouldn't say high expectations, but we were hopeful, Josh. We talked about Tim Kelly a lot. But after week 1, I mean, expectations have fallen all the way down already.
At least they schemed well to begin the game. Like you said, at least the opening script was good. I mean, that was a positive. If you're looking for any positive takeaway, I mean, it wasn't very tough. The Chiefs are kind of become like an underrated pass defense. They're very easy to run on. We know for years, just the meme in general is that the Chiefs defense wasn't good, but it's an underrated pass defense. But the Ravens are a very properly rated pass defense. And so it's another bad matchup. And are they going to have any answers after the initial script runs out? And Will Fuller can separate from anybody. So, Will Fuller, the usage just through the roof in week 1. Will Fuller, I've ranked in the top 15 now at receiver. But David Johnson, too, we joke about it. He had serious juice in week 1. But, you can't rank him higher than the RB 18 to 20 range this week just because the game script's going to be so bad. And, it was a very, very concerning week 1 for the Texans.
Yeah, just to hammer this point home, the Ravens are absolutely going to smash the Texans this week. It's not even going to be close. Every single element of their roster is better than the Texans. My only question is if the game script is going to be good enough, Hayden, for both Mark Ingram, for J.K. Dobbins to both be fantasy relevant, because we saw Mark Ingram last week. People drafted him as their running back 2 or hopefully running back 3, and J.K. Dobbins immediately got the goal line work.
Yeah, from a fantasy usage perspective, Mark Ingram, RB48, J.K. Dobbins, RB49. They're going to be outliers when it comes to efficiency, but having bankable volume right now is just something you cannot project. I would definitely lean towards J.K. Dobbins, who I think is just the more explosive, the better talent all the way around. But I think both of them will have to luck into high efficiency touchdowns here as RB3s. I think we need a couple more weeks to figure out this offense.
And quickly back to the Texans, it just didn't make sense. You said it well, Hayden. The script that Tim Kelly had, that was good. But then the Brandon Cooks trade immediately did not work out because he played about half the snaps. The signing of Randall Cobb was a complete zero until the end of the game, basically. That offensive line that they reworked last year and spent a first-round pick on Titus Howard, he looked absolutely abysmal. Terrified for his Houston Texans team that immediately they can go 0-2, and it's almost certainly going to look that way.
It's kind of a crutch to blame things on the offensive line, but the right side of the Texans line just got
awful.
Caved in. It was highly alarming.
Okay, let's go on over to the Kansas City Chiefs on the road against the Los Angeles Chargers. Chiefs are 8.5-point favorites here, a total of 47.5. Everyone on board here, Daigle, with the Chiefs because of Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. The ceiling is always there. But what about the Chargers? Who are you confident in playing, Daigle? Anyone?
I think we should have confidence in Mike Williams starting out because we thought there was a chance he's going to be out per a report throughout September, or at least limited in week 1 when he returned from injury. But that wasn't the case at all. To show up and still have 9 targets and lead the team in target share and air yards was tremendous for what we believe will be a high-flying offense since Tyrod Taylor averaged the second most air yards per attempt. So I think you have to like Mike Williams in negative game script. And yes, it was discouraging to see Austin Eckler, 1, taken off the field inside the 10-yard line for Josh Kelly, and 2, only see 1 target on the day. But again, negative up-tempo game script. Austin Eckler will be just fine for this one.
Yeah, it's not going to be another sleepy game, a paced game for the Chargers. Chargers Bengals was one of the more lull you to sleep games of week 1. That's not an option. Keenan Allen has traditionally had big days against the Chiefs, but it's hard to say without Phillip Rivers there. It's such a huge variable. Hunter Henry, who the whole industry felt a little down on in week 1, basically had a textbook Hunter Henry game. I think he was 5 of 8 for over 70 yards and maybe, I believe, a touchdown. So we know that Tyrod Taylor's not going to check down to running backs as much as Phillip Rivers, but I would be shocked. Is Austin Eckler going to have another 1-target game the rest of the season? Maybe it's not going to be 7 to 8 again every week, but I think Austin Eckler at least bounces back to 4 to 5 targets. And to me, the takeaway for Austin Eckler wasn't so much the lack of targets, but was the carries. He only reached 15 carries twice in his career, and then his first game of the post Melvin Gordon era, he got 19 carries. And we know it's a very easy Chiefs defense to run on. So it's very clear that we're going to have to lower pass catching expectations for Austin Eckler, but it's not like it's going to disappear from his game.
Hayden, good call on Sammy Watkins, by the way. Sammy is absolutely locked in to a wide receiver 2 role on your fantasy team. He's locked into the Chiefs wide receiver 2 role. Pat, look, I understand Sammy has had good week 1s in the past. And maybe I'm going to be wrong, but Hayden, I think that this year is different.
I think there's one narrative here that I'm going off of because, yes, he's been an inconsistent player. He was also depressed. He was going to the bars every day in Buffalo because he didn't like his coaching staff. He was injured. He loves Coach Reid. He's not injured. He looked like the most explosive player in week 1 next to Tyreek Hill. I'm buying the hype with Sammy Watkins. He's obviously a very easy player to fade and not believe in. I don't think this is a great matchup for him against the Chargers corners. But I think that you have to kind of rank him as a top 36 receiver moving forward. The usage was there. He looked explosive. You want pieces of this offense. What box is he not checking aside from the inconsistencies throughout his career? But I think that there's reasons for those to disappear just because he's in a better mental health state.
The usage was interesting because he wasn't being used down the field a ton. So he's kind of being used differently than we were used to with Sammy Watkins. It's just, talk about. So I don't think Austin Eckler is going to get 1 target the rest of the season. I really still believe Mecole Hardman's not going to have another one target game the rest of the season. And the week one thing with Sammy Watkins, obviously that's not predictive whatsoever. I don't think he's going to fade just because he had a big week one last year and then faded the rest of the season. But I mean, there is a pretty big chance that's still one of Sammy Watkins' 2 or 3 best games of the season. Tyreek Hill has not had like a 75-yard game, like 6 or 7 game. I mean, Tyreek Hill's going to explode again at some point. And when you have 2 target hogs like Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, and then even if he's going to be a very volatile role player, and truly still an ascendant player, and Mecole Hardman and Clyde Edwards-Helaire barely had any targets in week one. And I just wouldn't be surprised if that's still one of Sammy Watkins's better fantasy outcomes of the year. But yeah, I mean, just because it's not like I'm like, oh, I faded last year, so Sammy Watkins, fade him for week 2. But yeah, I just still in wait and see mode on Sammy.
Speaking of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I know you can't necessarily buy him low right now, but if there is someone in your league who says, oh, he looked bad on every single touch he got inside the 5 over the other running backs, you have to swoop in. Because if we were redrafting today, he's arguably the number 2 overall player in fantasy. That his floor moving forward could be, he showed a 30-touch floor every single week. He's a player you want to have and you want to start every single week, simply put.
Imagine that. I spoke about it on the recap show on Monday after the games. We talk about running back insurance all the time. I think that Mecole Hardman's wide receiver insurance for Tyreek Hill, and I just don't know if he's going to be fantasy relevant outside of a few manufactured touches outside of that. Because why take someone like Sammy? I would love to take and substitute out Demarcus Robinson, but he just seems like a manufactured touch player right now to me. But that's it.
I mean, a point I'll come back to. The Chiefs were very willing to let Sammy Watkins go. The only reason he's back is because he did so at their price, and that's an important thing to remember. To me, it's not like the Chiefs lack belief in Mecole Hardman. So I'm not saying I'm not going to rank Mecole Hardman over Sammy Watkins right now. Yeah. But this is one game against the team we just talked about played god awful in the Houston Texans, and it's not the time for sweeping assertions on the Kansas City Chiefs usage.
And the 2019 playoffs when they won the Super Bowl, it was Sammy Watkins. Like,
After a 16-game regular season where he did nothing.
Right, but here's the thing with Mecole Hardman is he's not a true receiver in the same ways that Sammy Watkins is a true receiver. The Chiefs have to scheme him open the ball because he's not a natural route runner. He's completely inexperienced. He was a cornerback at Georgia for a lot of his career there. Sammy Watkins is like a true, legit number 1 type of receiver in certain offenses, and I think you just can't take that off the field for someone like Mecole Hardman. I think that the path to Mecole Hardman having success is getting Demarcus Robinson off the field.
I agree with that.
Not look like an NFL player the last couple of games.
It just seems like we're arguing ourselves in circles because you didn't draft Mecole Hardman to start him even the first month of the season anyways, unless an injury happened. Like, we are letting his role play out, and you're not going to drop him either because I think he's a league winner if you have him, if something occurs ahead of him. And that's not just a Tyreek Hill. I think Sammy Watkins and Demarcus Robinson as well. So, I mean, nothing changed after week 1. I don't understand what we're talking about.
I think people expected more than like 5 or 6 routes or whatever he ran. I think that people were expecting him to at least have the number 3 job. It was definitely a discouraging week for Mecole Hardman.
And I also think there's a discussion to be had because Sammy Watkins was not drafted as a wide receiver starter for you, and I would play him as a wide receiver 3. I would absolutely play him as a wide
I agree with that. Yeah, Sammy Watkins definitely got higher for me. Hayden was higher on him all offseason. I agree.
Okay, let's go to Sunday Night Football. The New England Patriots go to the Seattle Seahawks. What a game we have on NBC. Seattle at home, 4-point favorites, a total of 45. 2 different offenses, Pat, that we saw with these 2 teams. We saw, to me, a Cam Newton-led offense with the Patriots that was very reminiscent of pre-Norv Turner in terms of the amount of runs and design runs, but also with elements of a post-Norv Turner style of offense in Carolina, where he was taking his checkdowns, his layups, his shorter throws. On the other side, you had Seattle, who came out throwing to their running backs and came out throwing downfield, even 4th down throws to DK Metcalf.
You mean, talk about 2 offenses going in totally different directions. For the Patriots, it was the fewest attempts for one of their starting quarterbacks since Jacoby Brissett attempted 19 passes in a 2016 start. I mean, it was their most rushing yards by a Patriots quarterback since 1977. It was the 2nd or 3rd highest rush total of Cam Newton's entire career. And, I mean, we know this approach isn't going to go anywhere because this is how their offense is set up. They have an abnormal amount of money for the Patriots invested in their interior offensive line. We know that they almost comprehensively lack passing game weapons. And Cam Newton, he passed a huge test by being healthy enough to handle that type of role. Both the shoulder and the foot checked out. And that's going to remain the Patriots' offensive approach. And the Seahawks, so as the Patriots are like throttling it back, the Seahawks are throttling it up. And so the Seahawks did this in a game where that kind of environment's rarely going to exist. The Falcons had a number of games like this last year where they almost literally did not force incompletions. And I just hope the Seahawks stick with this approach for this week against a much, much tougher pass defense, one where things won't be as easy as they were last week. And, there's going to be weeks where they let Russ cook and, it's not a great game. It's not an amazing performance. Most of them will be, but this could be a game where they could easily get discouraged, get thrown off the path. They have a first half where they throw a bunch of early downs and it doesn't go anywhere. And I just really hope the Seahawks stick with the approach, even if it doesn't work. And it'll probably, it's going to work well enough, but we know it's not going to be like last week. And I just hope the Seahawks have the fortitude to stick with it.
But as long as they're allowing him to cook, they're in position to be the best offense, most efficient offense in the entire league. No matchup can stop him. 15 of 25 first half plays were passes. 16 of 21 dropbacks in the first half on early downs, and 7 of those 21 dropbacks on early downs to running backs, as Josh said. That's what you want from this offense, and that is the path that has to happen if Russ is going to trump both Mahomes and Lamar Jackson in fantasy points at the end of the year. So you have to like what you see early on from their offense.
The big two at the top will be a big three if this approach continues. It's going to be Lamar, Mahomes, and Russell kind of rotating on a weekly basis because, if they run their offense like that, Wilson's going to be squarely in the mix for QB1 overall at the end of the season.
But Pat, I think you made a good point that this just historically has not been Brian Schottenheimer, right? Like that, there's a difference in conversation here. If Andy Reid did that in his week one, or a whole bunch of other offense coordinators did that in week one. This is one where if the Patriots invite you to run by playing more defensive backs or, just allowing more space, then Brian Schottenheimer is going to call running plays. At least that's what I think. And I'm nervous that we're going to immediately go away from it. And then we're going to get back into discussion. Hayden, I do want to ask you just how successful you think that this Patriots offense can be against the Seattle defense. And I've kind of hated this conversation, this conspiracy theory that's being floated on Twitter right now of, well, this is how the Patriots offense is going to run for the first 6 weeks, and they're going to switch over to a more pass-oriented offense. Look, as long as Cam Newton is healthy, this is what the offense is going to be. And it's run by Cam Newton, who is turning himself back into a franchise quarterback. I certainly hope that shoulder holds up, and I'm more nervous about that in November and December. But what I'm also terrified of, Hayden, is that this team has no wide receivers, and even Julian Edelman didn't look good in week one.
Yep, this was a team that is built to run the ball up the middle. They have the running back rotation to do it. They have Cam Newton healthy to do it. So I think that there's no reason to expect the Patriots to get out of this. I think they'll probably be finished last in pass attempts in the NFL this year. They went from first in pace last year down to 29th in pace in week one. So that's another concern. But Josh, you nailed it. It's Julian Edelman and nobody else. He had 60% of the team's air yards. And Diego, I heard you talk about this earlier, where this might even be a advantage to Julian Edelman if he's not playing on rushing downs. Just ignore the snap counts because he's not going to be playing in 2 receiver sets, but we don't get points for blocking. We only get points when you're catching the ball here. So I think that this is probably a positive for Julian Edelman as like a wide receiver 3, even if we're kind of scared this is going to be a run-heavy approach. Diego, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I figured I'd come in here and talk excitedly about Julian Edelman with Josh. Because he only was asked to run block on 1 snap throughout the entire game in week one. Whereas how they used him was running 20 routes on Cam Newton's 22 dropbacks. Like that's how they're preserving him and keeping him fresh. And that's why he still led the team in target share despite playing fewer snaps than Demir Burton and N'Keal Harry. So I was actually excited and encouraged about his usage in week one.
Oh no, I was encouraged by his usage.
Okay.
This is just an eye test thing. And that can be false. And I'm not saying Julian Edelman is washed at all. I just thought he looked a bit slower, a bit hobbled than we've kind of seen Julian Edelman in his past. And there were some rumblings of that in training camp as well. Mm-hmm. I think he had an overall good week one. I shouldn't have said what I said in the introduction, but again, what is most concerning is that literally no one else can is a weapon, is an advantage in the passing game. And N'Keal Harry got close to the goal line, then fumbled through the end zone. Demir Bird played a lot of snaps, but man. And I actually was optimistic about Cam Newton's throwing in week 1. Like everyone's talking about the running. I mean, the throwing was there. It was short as intermediate. And if they do open it up a little bit more and do ask him to throw more, I think that offense is going to work. However, they're going to have to script people open other than Edelman because no one's doing that in their own right now.
I don't know how, Pat, I'll toss it to you for your rankings if someone stands out, but I would imagine James White is in play this week, despite the discouraging usage last week, because like Josh said, there's nowhere else to go.
I mean, inconsistency from James White, inconsistency from like target-based running backs is obviously not unusual. And James White ultimately didn't see any reason. He's still like in the RB 30 to 36 range, which is kind of where James White always is. I'm kind of ranking not from like a pure PPR perspective, kind of from like a hybrid half PPR perspective, but he's in the RB 30 to 36 range. So it's Edelman and James White, and then, N'Keal Harry if you're really desperate, or if you're in the 14-team league, because it's very somehow I don't know how somehow the sporting cast got worse, which just didn't seem possible, but it did.
Well, while I said that about the wide receivers, I thought all the running backs looked better than they did last year. I thought Sonny Michel looked a little bit better than he did last year. You couldn't look much worse. James White, I thought in his opportunities, he looked solid. And I'm hoping that at some point he becomes a back that gets more work. And then even J.J. Taylor in his limited snaps, I thought he looked pretty explosive. So I'm what Josh McDaniels, and this is a big picture look, but I guarantee you after Tom Brady made his decision, this team sat back and was like, let's just go and do a 180. Let's do something totally different. And look, there are no Lamar Jacksons just out there floating around, but let's do something that we don't have to rely on precision and timing and all of that and perfect decisions in every single play. We can just do what Cam Newton did in his past with Cam Newton. And sure, they kind of lucked into him because no one else was in on him. But man, it was, to me, one of the stories of week 1. And I'm excited to see what the story continues to unfold like in week 2. Okay, let's close out with Monday Night Football. The New Orleans Saints are 5.5-point favorites on the road against the Las Vegas Raiders. 49.5 total here. Hayden, no Michael Thomas. What's the trickle down here? Who is benefiting from that?
I think it's Alvin Kamara and Jared Cook would be the two main guys. And of course, Emmanuel Sanders, who's somebody in my fantasy usage model as a rebound candidate. I think that the Saints are probably going to run the ball a little bit more. I think they would slow down the pace a little bit. So that's concerned overall for Drew Brees, who doesn't have his yards after the catch guy, Michael Thomas, to separate. But I don't want to overact too much just because the Raiders defense is so bad. They were 32 in rushing EPA defense last year. They didn't really make too many upgrades. We saw their first round corner get burnt. So I think Emmanuel Sanders definitely should be inside top 30, top 36 rankings. And I think Alvin Kamara is definitely in play as the RB1 overall this week.
I know Traquan Smith was the apples to apples comparison and who people jumped to initially, but there isn't much room left for Traquan Smith to grow in this offense. He played all but 2 snaps from 11 personnel for them. So it's going to be the same usage that saw him a 4% target share in week 1. The more I looked at it, I like Emmanuel Sanders a little bit more now because he did have a 17% target share and tied for the league lead in end zone targets and red zone targets, despite playing 11 fewer snaps than Traquan Smith. So if you bump up his usage, it seems like Jared Cook, like Hayden said, and Emmanuel Sanders are the winners here.
Yeah, I agree with Hayden's initial point where the biggest impact is probably going to be like floor solidification for Jared Cook and Alvin Kamara and raised floor where I don't think this is going to be like all of a sudden where like Emmanuel Sanders and Traquan Smith are just vacuuming up Michael Thomas's 12 to 14 vacated targets. It's going to be more of like a focusing on the players who are already a part of the offense. But yeah, I mean, Emmanuel Sanders does now vault into the wide receiver 3 range. And I think I have him at the wide receiver 34. So he's in that low end wide receiver 3 range. Because I think Traquan Smith, he will get a shot. I mean, it is someone who, despite so many disappointing stat lines, like the very disappointing usage, I mean, he has had some big games at least. He's put some big games on tape. So it's not like we can like totally rule. I mean, Traquan Smith in the GPP. So it's not like we can like totally rule out Traquan Smith. But yeah, I think it's mostly a solidification for Jared Cook and Alvin Kamara. And Emmanuel Sanders now goes from why bother wide receiver 4 to a wide receiver 3.
You're even cutting yourself off for jokes now. That's the best part about it.
I did like the Raiders' usage of Henry Ruggs last week. And again, it's a podcast that we record, so I have to talk about Henry Ruggs. And, I mean, it's true. They moved him in the slot. They converted a 45-yard reception on there. He was having shorter receptions. He was having manufactured touches in the backfield. Basically everything that we talked about. Now, it was the easiest matchup possible. The Panthers defense is atrocious. The Las Vegas offensive line was fantastic and gave Derek Carr, plenty of time in the backfield. But if they're chasing points, who is going to be that element that they can try to keep up with? To me, it's Henry Ruggs. And I know Brian Edwards drew a ton of praise from a lot of people. But Hayden, watching these games, they're on a different plateau, a different level in playing the game of football. And Henry Ruggs and Darren Waller and then Josh Jacobs look fantastic in the passing game as well.
Well, at least Gruden thinks that. He schemed the ball to Henry Ruggs like 5 times in the first half, plus it had a couple deep targets. He ended up having 51% of the team's air yards despite.
Oh, you love to see it.
So that's really encouraging for Henry Ruggs. The question I have for this week is, will he dodge Marshawn Lattimore? Henry Ruggs played like 52% of his snaps in the slot. Hopefully that means he dodges Lattimore, but maybe the Saints just think Henry Ruggs is their best receiver because he is, and they just have him shadow him no matter what. So that would be the only concern this week.
Well, the other concern is the knee, unfortunately, so John Gruden had spent a lot of time this week praising Henry Ruggs' toughness because he gutted out the knee injury. And I believe he didn't have a single catch, though, after injuring the knee. So he came back to the game, which is very good. But it's just super unfortunate because, like Josh said, I mean, he came out looking like the player better than Josh could have even dreamed of all summer. And then he injures his knee, though, and just you hope – it appears he's going to play. But just hope that he's already not fighting through something. And that is something to watch with Henry Ruggs this week.
Agree if healthy. It's funny because there's no better proof that wide receivers own their own ADOT than Ruggs being involved here. Like just to have 90 air yards compared to 30 for the next closest for Darren Waller, whose ADOT was under 4 yards per target. I mean, this offense has nothing over the top if Ruggs is not available. And that's what's concerning.
I mentioned Josh Jacobs. I believe it was 6 targets he had in that first game. On the other hand, it wasn't like he was the only passing back being used. Devontae Booker was being used there as well, and I thought Devontae Booker looked fine in that area. I just hope that it's in the game plan each week to get at least 4 or 5 targets to Josh Jacobs because he was stunning. He was outstanding in that role, and that should be, again, a major part of the game plan. Okay, we did it. Hour and 21 minutes, a little bit longer than last week, but we had some great discussions here, gentlemen. Again, you can go check out RotoPat's rankings. They are up on the site. You can check out Hayden's fantasy blueprint column. That is up on the site. We'll be back with John Daigle on Tuesday for his waiver column. But before then, we've got 2 more shows for you. Yes, we have Rotoworld Live again, noon Eastern on Sunday on basically every single platform. Just check our social medias. And then that night, I will be posting our recap show where we go game by game with the blurbers that covered the games. And one more time, I want to point you to give you a little boost, a little injection of some extra juice to rotoworld.com/edge, our season-long tools, our betting tools, all that good stuff. It's $4 a month, the price of guacamole. So go and get it. So, John Daigle, Patrick Doherty, Hayden Winks, I'm Josh Norris. Up the damn villa. Talk to y'all soon. See ya.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.